Great. First, thank you, everybody. First time over in London, so I really appreciate the invite. First time attending B-side, so really appreciate being able to join the community. And first time I'm presenting the project, so, if the demo gods are able to grace me with 3 first-time things, that'd be great. I do have a live demo that I'll start up. It takes maybe about 5 minutes to get everything up and running. There's some configuration aspects of it that if I can, I'll dive into it. And actually do a demo, or actually do the configuration and show you everything that I can. So this is CyberRange. The inspiration of this project really came when I was working at JP Chase a few years ago, between 2009 and 2014. We have a large enterprise environment, very complex, and the thought there was we were seeing a lot of issues within the environment, and we always needed to figure out a way to recreate those environments, those issues, the technologies that we were using. And we noticed, step back, start with the demo, because it's going to take a few minutes, so bear with me. All right. So again, going back to the inspiration, working in a large enterprise environment, you have a lot of complexities, and one of the challenges that you have is always trying to replicate those environments and being able to reproduce things, right? From a quality assurance perspective, environments differ from development to production. We know that quite often. So the goal here was to really invest in DevOps tooling and being able to take that tooling and constantly reproduce assets, environments, and things of that nature. So I went into cloud computing with Cisco at OpenStack when they were doing their OpenStack deployments. I very quickly learned that OpenStack was well behind AWS. And so I switched over and actually joined Tenable, who I'm a part of now. And I've really started diving into cloud computing. Since that time, I've really embraced the DevOps methodology. I've thrown a little bit of security aspect into it, so we've got this new coin phrase of SecDevOps. I'd like to say I'm really helping spearhead that movement. So CyberRange is really the goal of this is an offensive, defensive security environment, a safe environment for folks that do research. You use your laptops quite often, like I do. Your memory, your compute, it's always getting overutilized. We need the ability to leverage and tap into the cloud to really expand our capabilities, right? So that said, if you're interested, go ahead to the GitHub. It's right on CyberRange, and it's a fork of the Circle CI example right there. So a few thank yous. These are folks that might not have known that they've contributed in some way, shape, or form. Right off the bat, I mentioned I'm Tom Cappetta. I'm a vulnerability research engineer. I work for Tenable. I'm part of the Tenable research organization. So they're the ones that really sponsored me in getting me over here. I want to send a big thank you to them. Syracuse University. I mentioned JP Chase. When I was with Chase, I was sitting on the Syracuse University campus. We had a tech center there. Great collaboration. They don't know that I'm going to be applying to their master's program. My goal there is to go into their cybersecurity master's program and to take this project and kind of bring it to the next level. So I'm going to thank them in advance if they get a copy of the recording. Hopefully they say, hey, good, kudos to that guy, right? And then there's a few other folks as well that I want to call out. Form Assembly, a great company. They have a really nice way of streamlining your data with forms. The owner is actually French. So if you go to the GitHub, there's a sign-up link. I'll explain why there's a sign-up and why I need your information to share some of the tools with you. But I'm using a Form Assembly form, so I'll give them a quick shout-out. Few other folks. So Nessus Essentials, just a quick touch. I know we can't really pitch products here. I'm a Tenable guy, so I don't want to be overly biased. I've included a bunch of other folks that we've collaborated with and compete with at the same time or are in the market with us. But Tenable has done some really interesting things. Just a few weeks ago, they announced Nessus Essentials. The goal here with Nessus Essentials is they've rebranded Nessus Home, and they're trying to take that and say, hey, look, we're involved in the learning aspect of it. Cybersecurity is always going to be constantly learning, understanding what's going on in the environment, learning new tools, learning new procedures, things of that nature. Nessus Essentials is really trying to help you break into that market of vulnerability management and the tooling. We all know Kali, Rapid7, they have a well-known footprint. And then we have a few other folks. FireEye, they've come out with some really interesting stuff that I've leveraged and I've tapped onto. They might not know that I'm leveraging them, but Commando VM and Flare are really the two tools there. Commando VM is it's a Windows-based penetration testing system, so it's similar to Kali Linux, just Windows-based, and Flare is a malware analysis toolkit. All right, so let's see how we're doing on this. Of course, demo guys crushed me. Oh, there you go. That's an easy fix. Give me 1 second. Let's see what we have created first. All right. So the general goal of the project is to be able to create a ton of different vulnerable assets in an environment in AWS. And in February, AWS announced that they were going to allow folks to do penetration testing within the environment. There we go. We do have some assets. So I'm going to ignore the errors just for sake of time and not going through a debugging session live on a demo. It just doesn't work well typically. So I'll ignore whatever errors I have. If I can't jump into configuration, that's fine. But AWS back in February went ahead and said they recognize that people are using their platforms. They recognize that they have a process for allowing you to do penetration testing and analysis on your own systems. And they've gone ahead and opened that up to say, if you're doing testing on your own systems, we're going to just allow you to do whatever you want to do. So 2 weeks prior to that, I was building this project. I didn't really know that. I knew that they had a process of asking for permission, but I'm not necessarily an ask for permission type of guy. I'm more of a send me the email, tell me that I'm doing something abusive, and then I'll go ahead and step back. So 2 weeks before they announced that they were allowing us to do that, I was already working on this project. So I believe I'm the first in the market right now, and it's all open source. And like I said, it's going to be used for education on my own benefit. Hopefully, it's something that you guys can all get something out of it. So in general, I'm using a bunch of tools. Let's go to... Apologies, I'll be jumping around here and there. So I'm using a bunch of tooling to go ahead and create all of these different assets. And I've actually leveraged a few different tools. One of them is Cloudcraft. You can see that on the right-hand side. Cloudcraft is an excellent architecture blueprinting tool. It allows you to not only spec out your architecture, it allows you to also build it or even connect to your environment, pull back what you have in your environment, and give you a relatively accurate analysis of the cost. So on the right-hand side, what we're seeing is this toolkit in general, when you spawn everything up, it costs you about $1 an hour. I think that's relatively reasonable given everything that we have, roughly 30, 35 assets. On the left-hand side, like you saw in the EC2 console, on the left-hand side, we just have a whole bunch of different assets. I realize that it's very small. I don't expect you to really be able to see it. Apologies for that, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of an insight into the size and scale. The goal of this really is to create a few different areas that you can work in. So we know that red teamers have a dedicated network that they typically work in, a bunch of assets that they need to have control over. And the goal there and the thought there is we're going to go ahead and give you a separate subnet up there in the top left corner. On the over to the right, see if this works. There you go. Hey, I even got a nice little pointer. Over here, we've got just a bunch of vulnerable assets. Look, I'm no expert. I like to leverage tools, okay? I leverage tools quite often, and I believe leveraging tools allows me to get up to speed quicker and faster. A lot of these vulnerable assets that are over there in that section are all things that I've gotten offline. It's not something that I've actually built myself, so I don't want to take authorship of that. These are things that I found on VulnHub, Metasploit, Both 2 and 3 I've been able to leverage. And I've had to do some building to be able to get these things up to Amazon. So there's a little bit of work. It's not as easy as coming in and being able to say, hey, look, I take this and I just put it up there and it works fine out of the box. I've gone through a bunch of different assets, and at times there are challenges and some errors. I tried getting Windows XP up there. Unfortunately, Amazon doesn't like Windows XP. I'm not really sure why, but I was hoping that they would like it. So, in that green area, we have a whole bunch of targets. These are all purposely vulnerable assets that, the red teamers can actually use to go ahead and target. All of the assets that are there, that are listed there, are quite documented, right? So if you are like me and you're researching offensive security, the thought here is you're going to be doing a lot of research into how do I exploit things? What am I looking at? And having folks tell you, using a motto, try harder, is great, but when you constantly hit brick walls, it's frustrating. And so really the benefit of the project in general is to help you identify how to get through those walls, right? So if we give you some assets and we tell you, hey, look, you can spawn up this environment, you can create these assets, you can go ahead and attack your own assets, and you can do the research that you need to do to be able to understand how to get through and how to compromise those systems, I think that becomes something that's a value add. To expand on that, I've started looking into what do I want to do next, right? Where do I want to focus? How do I want to educate myself next? And these are the things that I'm highlighting are going to be in the yellow area, as well as the malware. So malware is a very big area of opportunity for myself as well as many other folks. And the biggest concern that I have with malware is we really don't know what's going on there. I don't trust any type of malware on my home network. I don't trust any type of malware on my computer. Even in a virtualized environment, I'm kind of nervous about that. So the thought here is I went ahead and put that up into the cloud. I created a completely separate and segregated environment that was isolated that would allow you to do your own level of malware analysis. And so that's that malware subnet. This detection lab, the goal here is for the blue teamers. That detection lab is something that I found just recently that's quite interesting. A gentleman by the name of Chris Long created a project, and that project's out there on GitHub. The challenge that I have with being able to take that project and fully incorporate it into the solution is it requires a bunch of reconfigurations. They use a ton of different scripts. I have no problem parsing through those scripts, but the challenge there is getting that to work with the current existing environment is going to be somewhat of a challenge. And then the honeypot network. We were just talking about Magcart a few moments ago, the gentleman that was right before me. Honeypot, honey tokens, I think those are always valuable tools that you can leverage from an intelligence perspective. So the thought here is you have a fully comprehensive red team, blue team intelligence collection network tool set that you can leverage to advance your own training, knowledge, and understanding. I've touched briefly on some of the technologies used here. Obviously, we've got AWS. For those that do cloud computing in any way, shape, or form, please take note of Git secrets. Any repository that you are working in, any code repository that you are working in, where you are leveraging your API keys, please use this tool. This tool will help you prevent committing those keys to your repository. And just in case you're not aware, when folks scan GitHub and they see your keys, you're probably looking at less than a minute or two before your entire account's compromised. So Git secrets, huge tool, definitely leverage it. It's very simple to get up and running. I'm a big believer in Terraform. Terraform has been doing amazing things for me. I also like Vagrant quite often. I use the two, but Terraform seems to work a little bit better at scale. I've recently been talking about, I've recently been introducing Inspect. Inspect is a testing methodology, if you will, or a testing tool set that you can go and you can define infrastructure and leverage that those definitions to confirm that your systems and your applications are up and running the way that you would expect. So I'm starting to introduce some Inspect, and the goal here is when you go ahead and boot up this range, I want to make sure that everything's up and running exactly as I would expect it. So Kali is pretty standard. Packer is another great tool. Packer was used for the Metasploit 2 and 3 stuff. So Rapid7 does publish the Metasploit on their GitHub, and you're able to actually go ahead and build that. And a lot of that uses Packer. Chocolatey Windows Package Manager and Cloud Init is basically just a startup for Amazon, a startup script for Amazon. It allows you to just go ahead and define a few scripts and get those assets up and running with a few definitions that are used at boot. And that's really the benefit of Cloud Init. The vulnerable assets, I covered that. I'm not going to really go too deep into that. And then the researcher assets, I touched on the Kali and Commando. One of our reverse engineers introduced us to Remnux. I'm just starting to get this introduced into the environment. I have one slight issue where I can't get SSH connectivity, but I'll be working on that over the next few days and getting that in there. And then the only other thing I'll really call out, because I think this is quite interesting, is Teapot. Teapot is T-Mobile's honeypot system. It's been quite advanced since I last used it, which was about a year ago. And they've gone ahead and updated it recently. So I am reintroducing that. Hopefully that'll be up and running in a second. The Cloud Init scripts does take quite a while to get that up and running. So let's dive into some of the code aspects of it. If you're not familiar with Terraform, you need to kind of understand what Terraform requires, both from a manifest and an asset declaration perspective. So in the project, when you start navigating through some of the code, you'll see a Terraform folder. In that Terraform folder, there's a few environments. These environments are where I have the AWS AMIs set up. These AMIs, again, I've had to take these systems, I've had to go ahead and get them up and running on my own system, I've had to export them, then I've had to import them into AWS. Sometimes I'm successful and we have an AMI, sometimes I'm not, and I can't add that to our repository. So there are some reasons why we don't have all of the AMIs or all the images, vulnerable images that I'd like. Within those environments, we have a few different manifests. One is the main manifest and one is the variables. We'll go through that in just a second. So from a main manifest perspective, it's pretty straightforward. We've got an AWS provider that we go ahead and identify, and I just want to call out a proper way of leveraging your credentials within these manifests. When I first got introduced into Terraform, I was hard-coding my credentials in the provider. Now I've gone ahead and used this. I think this is just a little bit more secure. I'm sure there's probably even a more secure way of introducing your credentials into Terraform, but right now that seems to be the best option for me. We have the modules that are being defined, the stage and stage, and the Terraform backend. The Terraform backend really just allows you to say, I'm going to go ahead and create a bunch of assets, and when I create those assets, we're going to create a file that says these assets are in this state, and that's where that's stored. It's stored in an S3 bucket. And then on a final piece down below, we have the stage and infrastructure. That's really just calling the actual infrastructure itself, the infrastructure manifest itself. I would say it's inheriting those declarations, and then it's taking those declarations and going ahead and creating the assets like you just saw a few minutes ago. Variables, we have a lot of variables that are being defined across the board, but these are pretty straightforward. And in the main Terraform folder, there's just a few couple variables there. But in the SecOps folder, which is, I wonder if it's on the next page. In the SecOps folder, we do have variables here, and that has many more declarations. It not only defines all of the different AMI lookups, but it also defines a few other things, such as instance size and things of that nature. I mentioned good and bad. I covered this just a minute ago, but this was just a very good example of the good and the bad. Please don't do this. This is horrible. If you're going to leverage Terraform and commit your keys, that's probably a bad thing. This is where Git secrets would help you, okay, just to call attention to that. So if you implement Git secrets and you're using Terraform, please go ahead and run a scan against your repo. Within the infrastructure folder, we have a bunch of definitions. Again, this is a CyberRange. The goal of the range is to be able to define a bunch of assets and to get those assets up and running. So how do we do that? Well, we do that with two different sets of modules. One of those modules is a network module, and the other is a SecDevOps module. Again, I'm embracing a SecDevOps mentality, and I'm saying, hey, look, let's go ahead and start coining that phrase and really promoting it. Obviously, within the network stuff, we have network-based assets that are going to be created. I'll show you those in a few minutes. And then within the SecDevOps stuff, we're just pulling everything together and sharing all the information that was previously created in the network layer over to that particular module, so that the instances that are being created actually understand where are they going, what subnets are they going in, and whatnot. Okay. GitHub repo has quite a few folders, a bunch of readmes, as well as a bunch of other things. I've gone ahead and identified the network and the SecDevOps asset folders that we were just talking about. I do leverage a bunch of cloud init stuff. The one thing I would say here is I've pulled away from leveraging cloud init, and I've gone into snapshot in the instances once I have them up and running. The benefit of the snapshotting is I can get these assets up and running quicker. So when I come to the stage and I say, hey, I can do this in less than 5 minutes, it's because I've done all of the work and I've taken the snapshots, and really all I'm doing is saying, hey, let me just boot up an asset instead of let me do all of the configuration that's necessary for that asset. A good example of the amount, Teapot is a good example of an asset that I have to configure on the fly every time it gets booted up, so it doesn't come up right away. And when it comes up, it probably takes about 5 or 10 minutes for that Teapot asset to really come up. I would say closer to 10. And then once it does, you actually have to reboot it. So again, the cloud init stuff is there. It's 4 examples, but the challenge there is that it's going to increase the amount of time that it takes to actually get this system up and running for you. Within the network folder and the SecDevOps folder, we have a bunch of different manifests. Obviously, in the networking space, we have a bunch of VIPs, gateways, routes, subnets, and the variables doesn't really have anything in it, and a VPC. So the benefit here is you take this repository, this code repository, this project, you go ahead and it's spawning up in your own AWS environment. Hopefully you don't use a corporate environment. I personally use my own personal environment simply because I don't want to corrupt the corporate environment with crap. So this allows you to define everything that's going on in that network, what your network looks like. In that SecDevOps folder, there's a bunch of other things, right? I think we could clearly see some attacker stuff. We've got some key pairs. This AWS AMI is just a data lookup. It tells me all of the different AMIs that I'm going to be using for creating the assets. I've got a CTF playground, some honeypots, malware. Security groups are rules, are networking rules that allow assets to talk to each other as well as assets to talk to the outside. And then I have a bunch of different targets, both Windows and Linux. If you go to the GitHub repository, I'll take a quick second to go there. On GitHub, there is a to get started, go here link, okay? And it's very straightforward. I had this sign-up form, and I don't want you to think that I'm sitting here trying to pitch something or trying to collect your data. I really don't want to collect any information, but there's a reason why I need your account number. These images, the Windows images, I have a concern with Windows licensing. I can't open these images up to the public unless somebody in Microsoft is here and can go ahead and give me that little note. My concern there is that I could have the repo taken down, I could have my account locked down, and so I want to avoid some Windows licensing stuff. So if this is a project that interests you, just trust that I'm not going to be taking any of your information and using it in any bad way. It's just I need your account number to be able to share those images with you so that you can actually create these assets on your own. Okay. I also have, I mentioned at the very beginning, there was a Circle CI project that I leveraged. That Circle CI project was fantastic. It gave me a multi-tiered AWS environment, and I've leveraged that to go ahead and build multiple layers of builds. The project itself was upgraded to Terraform 0.12 just recently. As I was preparing for this over the past 2 weeks. That was released on the 23rd I found a few bugs. As a result of the CI builds, I did find a few bugs. This last build just came in, I think last night. I opened it up, and the one before that was just earlier in this week. They're not blockers, but if you are using Terraform and you're having an issue, go ahead and do diligence and just make sure that you're on the same version. The concern that I have with that V12 version is once you upgrade to V12 or V0.12, it looks like Terraform creates a file that says you must have a minimum Terraform version. So there's some changes that are going on there. I think we're still, to some degree, at an early testing phase of 0.12, but everything seems to be working. So if you do download the project and you find, hey, this is not working for me, I can't get Terraform to function as I would expect, just go ahead and double check your versions there. Within the Circle CI workflow, we've got a bunch of different steps. That Circle CI workflow is in the project. The declarations are under the Circle CI, the .Circle CI folder, and there are a bunch of different steps that are being done here. The thing that I want to draw attention to when I say that I'm able to go ahead and create these assets in a very short period of time is that Terraform apply step. It only takes about 2 minutes. To go ahead and get all those assets up and running. What's interesting is it takes about 6 minutes to get them destroyed. So I'll walk you through the destruction aspect of it because I've noticed that Terraform doesn't necessarily clean up all of your assets in the environment as much as you'd like. I found that Terraform in general has lingering volumes, and sometimes there's some other things. For sake of not going through all of the configurations and not spending ample amount of time trying to debug this while everybody's looking at me and staring at my screen, I'm just going to show you a little bit of a visual. I just created this earlier today. I got the system up and running. It boots up like I said, it boots up. The errors that I saw before was just because I reconfigured a volume size. I don't know why I reduced it. Apparently I broke things, so I just have to revert that back. But once you get the system up and running, you now have a playground full of vulnerable things. And as you can see here, you've got quite a few, there we go. As you can see there, you've got quite a few reds on a few of those different assets. I'm going to suspect that this is one of those Metasploitable assets. And the thought here is twofold, right? Again, it's an open source project. The thought with open source projects and open source knowledge is that you have the ability to see things without having to fear a black box scenario. So if you know the assets that are going to be created, if you know the assets that you're going to be looking at, and you want to practice and fine-tune some of your skills, you can leverage a scanner, in this case Nessus or Rapid7 or OpenVAS or whatever other scanner you want to leverage, but I've included Nessus and Rapid7 in here. But you can leverage those scanners to go ahead and just do a quick scan of your system to say, hey, what do I have here, right? And what can I start researching? That gives you information on the software that's being installed, the versions, as well as any other indicators of vulnerabilities. The benefit here obviously for red teamers is you have the ability to very easily see some of the low-hanging fruit, as well as some of the more challenging things that you can focus on as well. AWS Nuke. This is a great tool. Let me just very quickly show you AWS Nuke. So we're going to go ahead and run it. And AWS Nuke is a fantastic little tool. What it allows you to do is completely wipe out your environment. The thing that I would caution you on is wiping out your environment can be very destructive if you're in an enterprise. And AWS Nuke does not discriminate against what you have in your environment. If you do not have termination protection on your assets and you go ahead and leverage this tooling and start wiping out your environment, it's very likely you're going to have severity 1, P1, whatever incident you might think of in your environment. But one of the benefits is if you're using your own personal account like I do, I can go ahead and nuke my account quite often. And I have no concerns nuking it. I destroy absolutely everything. The account has nothing in it, and then I can go ahead and get started again right from scratch. So AWS Nuke is a fantastic tool. The caution here is that you really need to be careful with what you're doing there and what you're nuking. I'll come back to that in just a minute. So a few tips, right? If you are in an enterprise environment, my suggestion would be talk with your cloud security folks or your cloud architects. I believe if you've gone ahead and set up a separate organization or account ID, I believe you should be safe because AWS Nuke can look at just account ID and it can say, okay, I'm just going to wipe everything out at that account. It will do a global scan if you define all of the different regions. So my suggestion is go ahead and just target one region at a time. Drive run output. So when you run at AWS Nuke, you can go ahead and just say, hey, just show me everything that I'm going to be wiping out. And you can just do a simple dry run. You can take that output. You can analyze it. There is a whitelisting approach. So when you leverage that dry run, and you go ahead and see all the things that you don't want to delete, there's a way that you can go ahead and define those things in a configuration file. And that whitelisting approach, for me, I whitelist my AMIs, and I whitelist my volumes and my snapshots. Beyond that, I pretty much delete everything, except for my account, right? And then my thought there is, my final thought here is initialize early and purge often. Like I said, Terraform is a fantastic tool, but I've noticed that there's some opportunity in a Terraform destroy phase where it does destroy instances altogether. But I do notice that there are sometimes lingering volumes and snapshots and things of that nature that are hanging around. And so AWS Nuke just comes in right behind it and it wipes out. Why is AWS Nuke important? Well, if you're using your own environment, your own account, and you have a bunch of assets that are lingering, you're going to end up accumulating costs, right? So one thing that I would suggest is go ahead and do that purging. And a little tip, just because we're all here, and I have the opportunity to mention it, if you are interested in getting your own AWS account set up and running, you can set up a free tier account. I believe, and I'll double check, I believe every definition of assets is defined as a T2 micro. So I believe it should all be underneath that free tier. But the one thing I would say is don't hesitate to go onto eBay and grab a few AWS credits. You could get like $150 AWS credit for like $20, $30 USD. So I don't know what that converts into pound-wise, but very simple. I often get AWS credits and I just stack them onto my account and I have a minimal bill at the end of the month. But really, AWS Nuke really helps you maintain your costs or at least reduce your costs. So next steps and what I'm looking to do. I mentioned inspect. The goal with inspect is really to be able to make sure that the things that I'm spawning up and the things that I'm creating are actually being created and set up the way that I'm hoping that they are. So I believe inspect is going to be a huge area of investment for me. The goal there is I want to learn about the tooling. I think there's a lot of benefit in being able to say, hey, I need to define infrastructure and assets and web apps, and I need to define and make sure that they are set up in certain ways. From a secure SecDevOps perspective, I believe that tooling is going to be relatively key. It should be something that you can introduce into your environment. If you have insecure code configurations, you should be able to introduce that. You should be able to define what those configurations are that you want on the system, and you should be able to monitor that system in that environment on a regular basis. I will be looking to get those tests into the CI/CD pipeline. And the goal there is during a build phase or during a build process, I already have definitions of what my systems are going to look like. I want to make sure that everything is passing. Some of the additional next steps is the malware stuff. I'm going to be focusing more on the malware area. I think the thought there is I want to have an environment where I can really do some deeper reverse engineering. And I think these are some of the things that I've seen that I'm going to be looking at and doing some research on. Fuzzing on the very bottom, having a separate fuzzing environment is going to be kind of key as well. Being able to actually spawn something up in AWS, put an application there and being able to just run and execute and see what comes out of that after a day or two or weeks, whatever it might be, of analysis, I think that's going to be relatively key. And then, Packer and compile explorers as well as the honeypot network. The honeypot network is something that I think is really quite interesting. If you haven't explored or played with honeypots, I really suggest you take a look at that teapot asset. You can download it as an OVA on your own system. Hopefully with this, you'll be able to get it up and running in your own AWS environment. Last year, for an Asia conference, I did a Embracing the Rise of SecDevOps presentation. One of my peers actually presented it, but I helped construct the presentation, and I set up a honeypot over in Australia. And I just wanted to see what was going on. Like, what are people doing? And I got to tell you, it was alarming. It was interesting as you were able to track the different threat actors across the world and where they were coming from. And I've got to imagine that folks were cloaking where their location was, but it's just interesting to see the different types of things that are coming over the network and how these honeypots are able to capture that information. That said, 525, I think I've done relatively well. I did not at all dive into the configuration and actually getting a live demo up and running too deeply, but let's go back really quick to your destruction of all the assets. So it took about 5 minutes here. Last time it took just about 2.5. So it took about 5 minutes to do the full AWS nuke. And just to confirm again, all right, let's go ahead and make sure all these things are destroyed. All right. So basically, the tool here that I'm trying to introduce you to is something that you can use to be able to get your own security environment, security lab up and running. It should be bootstrappable. My goal is get you to download it. You go ahead and do a little bit of a configuration, hook in your AWS keys, or make sure that you have connectivity to that, give you access to the AMIs, and boom, you're up and running. From a collaboration perspective, if you go ahead and do poke and prod at this project and you find any issues, I'm more than willing to look into them. I'm more than willing to fix them because I do leverage some third-party tools. It might be outside of the scope of what I can do or what I can fix, but by all means, if you see an issue, open it up against the project, ping me on LinkedIn. I don't know, if you see me in the streets, tap me on the shoulder, whatever it might be. I'm definitely willing to look into it and continue to enhance this project. That said, we got about 5 minutes. I'm assuming towards the end of the day, we can go ahead and break out and allow everybody to take a few drinks. But if anybody has any questions, by all means, raise your hand, ask it. Otherwise, I appreciate your time. Thank you.